gentlemen, thank you for joining me. It is the 16th of November. I wish it was the 6th. Time's flying by.
Oh,
2018, it's Friday. It's 12:08 p.m. Central Standard Time. Joining me again is Ethan Swick. Ethan, how are you today?
I'm doing really good. I'm so glad it's Friday. How are you doing, JC?
You know, I'm doing good, and like you said, it's Friday. And not only that, but this is a special edition podcast. Monday, for those of you who don't know, Stan Lee died. He passed away. And for those of us who love comic books, we love the comic book characters, that whole world, that universe. That was a very big day. It was a sad day. I didn't get anywhere near as emotional with his death as I did with other deaths, but hey, it was still pretty sad. And I believe that was that, I said it was Monday, right?
Yeah.
So it would have been on the 12th. Okay, so Monday the 12th, Stan Lee passed away, and I believe it was in the morning. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think he had been battling pneumonia or something.
Right.
And he was rushed to the hospital, and so I heard about it about 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, I think, at least for me, I heard about it like you later in the day. So again, very sad, but the point of this podcast, we're going to take a sidestep from, and it will be a metaphorical sidestep, into away from the profile podcast that we've been doing, these interviews, these get-to-know-you interviews, and we're going to honor Stan Lee. We're going to honor Marvel Comics, and not only that, but we're going to talk about the meaning of comics to both of us, just as young students here at Evangel, and just as humans. Comic books have a huge impact on my life, and I'm sure they have on Ethan's as well. Hopefully we'll get to hear some of that. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoy this. Ethan, let's get started. When did you first start reading comic books?
That is an excellent question. So, my first exposure to like actual comic books, I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and so I had already seen the first Spider-Man movie, and at the time, that was like my movie. That was my favorite.
Right.
And so, my first comic books that I actually ever owned were the Scarlet Spider, which. You get comic books from your grandparents. Yeah, from Ben Reilly. You get comic books from your grandparents or older relatives, and to them it's all the same. Like this guy kind of looks like Spider-Man, so this is probably a Spider-Man book. And so I got all these Scarlet Spider comic books, and I really enjoyed them. I still have the same copies and everything, but it's not exactly Spider-Man. For those of you that aren't familiar, it's Spider-Man's clone, Ben Reilly, who takes up the mantle of the Scarlet Spider after our own Peter Parker kind of takes a break from being Spider-Man. And they're really good books, but the ones that I really started to read and really love was these reprints. They were printed on like newspaper print, newspaper paper, and they were reprints of like the very first Spider-Man books. So like Amazing Fantasy #1 or 15, and then Amazing Spider-Man #1 and #2, all on this really tiny little like miniature comic books. But I read the crap out of those things, and I had that for the Avengers and Fantastic Four, and I was probably 9 or 10 when I really started to get into those. But yeah, and then ever since, I still buy comic books at Vintage Stock. I get the new books.
Great store.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, like you, my exposure to comic books, and in particular just Spider-Man in general, was through the Tobey Maguire version of Spider-Man. So the very first movie, I remember seeing it, and I fell in love with this whole world and this whole idea of a superhero. I think I might have been 7 or 8 at the time, and it was just really, really cool. And admittedly, my entrance into the comic book world was not even through comics. It was through, like I said, the movie. And then you had, if you remember, the 90s TV show, the Spider-Man
Oh, absolutely,
series,
yes.
which is a spectacular series.
I love that.
It's, the Spectacular Spider-Man and the Ultimate Spider-Man are great, but it has nothing, in my opinion, on the 90s cartoon series. That's a great series.
They built that universe just in the 90s Spider-Man show. That universe on its own was just so deep and had so many characters. Like I love Spectacular Spider-Man, the newer show, and I've watched all of those episodes, and I really think it's great. But the old Spider-Man show from the 90s, that was great. It was fantastic.
And the 60s show, I don't know if you've ever dabbled in the 60s animation,
Yes.
that's some rough stuff. In fact, Ethan and I, before we started this podcast, were talking about a comic book that I have in front of me. It's a collection for the Marvel Masterwork. I almost said Masterpiece. I think that's a different collection.
I think it might be.
But if you read through some of this old comic, it's just, it's rough. and I love Stan Lee. I love, just his contribution to the world of comics. But man, you really gotta love the characters to get back into it. And I forgot how rough some of this stuff was, because I was like probably 8 years old when I picked up this comic book. Mm-hmm. Went into a Barnes & Noble. I wanted to read Spider-Man, and this was my introduction. And I look at it now, and it's like I told Ethan, ladies and gentlemen, the way people talk in this is so different, and it's nothing at all like what we would say today. Mm. So Peter could be swinging through New York City and land on a building, and he'll go, "Wallop and wedge snappers."
There's a fire across the street. I better go stop it.
And it's just one of those things. It's like, okay, great, Captain Obvious.
Oh man, those are so good. And back to the 60s show, this same thing. But like what's great about it is that I'm pretty sure what they do is they take like almost the same panels from the comic books that were coming out at the time and just animate them, but they look identical cuz like It's like the same art style, the same like cell shading and everything. Mm-hmm. And so the 60s show it's a little rough to get through. It's fun. It's got that charm where it's old and it doesn't really know what it is.
Right.
But I remember watching that. I also watched, I don't know if you ever watched Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. But it was Iceman was with him from time to time, and Firestar. Mm-hmm. That show it's kind of the same deal. A little old, but it was fun.
It was a great way for kids to enter the world of comic books.
Yeah.
Today, and this is something that I've really been interested in, when comic books first started, I think they really thought, this is just a kid's thing. And naturally, that's what it is. I mean, when you listen to Stan Lee's story of how he came up with Spider-Man, there was a lot of blowback from some of the higher-ups in the industry. Mm-hmm. We can't have a kid be a hero.
Oh, yeah. Of kids are sidekicks. That's all they do.
Right. And that's why Spider-Man is so revolutionary in the comic book world. So it's huge deal for Spider-Man to be as successful as he has been. And I'm talking about him like he's a real person. I know he's not. I'm not that delusional. But to me, and maybe Ethan can relate to this, it's a very relatable world, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. As a young man who comes from a broken home, didn't really have a father figure, I really feel like God used that genre to speak into my life. Just about what it means to choose good over evil, to be a man, to stand up for what's right. There's a lot of good in comic book stories. It's not all action. It's not just for entertainment. I think there are good messages in a lot of the stories. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of why they've been so successful. They appeal to something that's really deep within us.
Yeah, in comic book history, Stan Lee has always been the one to kind of push the envelope. So like you said with Spider-Man, before that, superheroes, they were these glamorous people that really didn't have any problems. Superman, he'd save the day, go home to Lois Lane, whatever, end of story. And all those heroes, from the golden age of comic books, they were pretty glamorous, and they were adults, in their 30s and living their best lives. But then Stan Lee kind of comes onto the scene in the 60s with the Silver Age of comics, and he's commissioned to come up with all these heroes to kind of rival what DC had been doing for a long time. And so he comes up with the Fantastic Four and the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man and all these people that he made them really human. And that's what people love about these characters now, is because the thing struggles with being ugly and not being accepted by society. Right. And the Hulk, he struggles with his anger and with his two natures, and Peter has all these struggles with being a normal kid and trying to get through life. So absolutely, all these characters Stan Lee created, not only are they heroic and fantastic and to read about, but
Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four. Yeah, but they're not only that, but they're human, and that's how we relate to them, and that's what makes the story so good.
Yes.
And as far as like also like pushing the envelope, I don't know if you're familiar with there was an issue of Spider-Man in the 70s, I think, where it was about drug use, and that's kind of what pushed the Comics Code Authority to really loosen up on theirs, because they were trying to tell a positive story about why drugs are bad, and at the time that just wasn't allowed, so they published the book without even getting the seal of approval from the Comic Code. But yeah, so Stan Lee, he did a lot with comics, and he really pushed the envelope, and it's because of him, I think comics are the way they are now.
Yes, I would agree. And just to make a point here, I know some people out there, and it's not very many, but relatives, friends, who would say, you guys really overrate this comic book thing. You worship this Stan Lee guy. I actually know people who feel this way. It's hard to believe.
Really?
And guys, I just got to say, we're not worshiping him. I get death comes for everybody. Obviously, Stan is gone. I was a huge fan of Michael Jackson. He died, I think it was back in 2009. Michael Jackson died. So obviously, I'm not making a god out of Stan Lee. Obviously, he's gone. But the work that he left behind, it's bigger than Stan Lee. In fact, the characters aren't even what's important. It's the stories and the morals and the ideas that are pushed behind them. And it's interesting that you bring up the drug use story, because you go through a comic book today, and you can find some interesting stuff.
Oh yeah, comic books. You walk into a comic book store and just looking at some of the covers of some of these books, they push our traditional conservative values, but and not always in a positive way either.
Yeah, and I think that's, as much as I love progress, I would like to see us keep some level of innocence in the stories, because they are still for kids, and yes, we've got the adult audience too. My hope is that it doesn't veer too far to one side or the other, but we shall see down the road. Let's get into this. Why do comic books, and not even just comic books, but superheroes in general, mean so much to you?
Why do they mean so much to me? Well, that's a good question, and
if they
it's
mean
so
anything at
it's
all.
if they mean it, they mean quite a bit to me.
Okay, good.
And it's really hard to put your finger on it, but if I had to say it kind of goes back to that being able to relate to these people, and that's part of Stan Lee's legacy, is making these characters that are so relatable. But I don't know, superheroes, they inspire something in us.
Right.
And I can remember, what book is it? I think it's Spider-Man 33, like Amazing Spider-Man number 33, one of the best issues of all time, I feel like. And there's this moment in it, and we've seen it recreated in film many times, film and television. And it's that scene with Spider-Man is underneath like tons and tons of machinery and concrete and all this wreckage, like this whole building is coming down, and he's basically gonna die if he doesn't do anything. And so there's all this water coming down, pouring over his mask, and the only thing that gets him through that is thinking about how he needs to save his Aunt May, because at that time she's I think she's in the hospital. She has radioactive poisoning from getting a blood transfusion with Peter, that he didn't even realize that his blood is radioactive. It's a whole thing. But what gets him through that is thinking about his loved ones and his family, and eventually he is able to do this incredible feat of strength, because Spider-Man's power set, he's not the strongest superhero. He can lift 10 tons on a good day, but this is hundreds of tons, and he's able to just do this amazing feat of strength just by sheer willpower of wanting to save his loved ones. And so that's something that touches me and inspires me, because even though I can't lift thousands of tons, for those of you out there, but I like to think that in times of crisis, I would be willing to do just about anything for the people that I care about.
Amen.
And it's good to see that in a superhero, because we get these heroes that don't really have a lot of risk, but Peter Parker, he risks everything. Right. Every battle, he goes in thinking it's very possible I could die, but I'm going to do it anyway. And so that's something that just like that specific character as a superhero touches me in seeing his sense of responsibility, I guess. And I guess that kind of transcends to heroes in general, why they mean a lot to me, because it's not like their powers or anything that mean a lot, but it's their ideals and the morals that they perpetuate that really hit me on a level that makes me want to be a better person.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not gonna lie, I mean the powers are cool, obviously.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if I could have spider sense, I'd sign up for it.
Oh yeah, I've heard some great arguments that spider sense is like the greatest power in the Marvel universe in general.
To me, it's one of the best. It's just cool. It's pretty awesome. But to piggyback off of what Ethan said, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm not belittling anybody who only knows of Marvel through the MCU, but you got to go beyond the MCU. You got to get into the stories, into the psyche, because when you can really read the thoughts of the characters,
oh yeah,
and it's like, wow. You know, I can actually relate to that, as opposed to, oh no, Thanos is hurling down a planet, what do I do? I can't relate to that, but I can relate to, hey, Aunt May's sick, I don't have an Aunt May, but if I did, you know, I can relate to a lot of these different things, and I didn't plan on sharing this, but since we're on this topic, I will. Those of you who know me know that I am a wheelchair user. If you thought it was a secret, well, the secret's out of the bag now, so there you go. I've been in and out of surgeries when I was much younger, and I actually missed a lot of my elementary school days due to being in operation for my condition. And the students, my peers, and the teachers knew how much I loved superheroes. And it makes me teary-eyed, so I'm not gonna get teary-eyed. But I just have to tell you, I got a whole gift basket of Marvel, DC. I mean, how to draw the Marvel heroes. I got action figures. I mean, all this stuff. Nice. And it meant so much, because if you can have that kind of inspiration in a time where you're not doing very well, it's like you said, you can really do just about anything. And I think that's why, and I can relate to what Ethan's saying, guys, and I'm sure many of you can, that's why heroes mean so much to us. It's not just that they're superheroes. I mean, any of us, and I think Stan Lee would agree with this if he were here today in this studio. It'd be cool if he was.
Oh, man.
Any of us can be a hero. That's why he wrote comic books. I think he really believed that all it took was one person to do something good. And that's like one of my favorite cameos that Stan did.
Oh, Spider-Man 3, yes.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said. You know.
his famous "nuff said."
Right.
I love that.
And he just walks off, and it's one of the most profound things, in my opinion. And not to oversell it, not, again, to worship him, but one person really can make a difference. And I think that's the whole point. Not the whole point, but a part of the Christian message is we can make a difference through Christ.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's a lot to be said for that there. What's your favorite story when it comes to... We know that Spider-Man is your favorite character, correct?
Yes. Spider-Man has always been my favorite superhero.
So what is your favorite story that you've read?
Okay, my favorite Spider-Man story. Ooh. I could list off a few that I really like. I really like the whole arc with Spider-Man and his arch enemy, the Green Goblin. I think that is fantastic because I love the reveal of Norman Osborn.
Oh yeah.
And it's horribly tragic, but the death of Gwen Stacy was really an important time for comic books. It kind of like we talked about earlier, comic books are really innocent, but then when this lasting, profound death in Spider-Man's life kind of took away a little bit of that innocence.
Right.
One of the stories that I really cherish, and this is a really recent one, just in the past 5 years or so, is the Superior Spider-Man. And I'm sure you're familiar with that. It's basically Dr. Octopus dies, but right before he does, he switches minds with Peter Parker. So Dr. Octopus's mind is in Peter Parker's body. But luckily, and then Peter Parker dies in Doc Ock's body, which is really profound. But luckily, a piece of Spider-Man or Peter Parker's consciousness is still present within Spider-Man's body. So he is able to come back and become normal
Completely.
Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But during that 36 issue run, I have them all and I really love them. It's really a great story of how Dr. Octopus has always known that he is the superior to Spider-Man. Like he believes intellectually he's superior. He knows what's better for the world more than Spider-Man does. But during this story arc, Dr. Otto really he learns quite a bit about how to be a real hero, because like he is evil in a sense, but Dr. Octopus, all of his plans for the most part are because he wants to see the world become a better place.
Yes.
But he has like this twisted view of it. But when he becomes Spider-Man and he has to take on those responsibilities of stopping street crimes and stopping supervillains that want to hurt his loved ones and all that, Otto really goes through a lot of challenges. And at the very end of it, the climax of it, Peter Parker is in his mind really has to teach him what responsibility really means. And that's something that we get the line, responsibility all the time, but this was a great expression of like showing a supervillain how to be a heroic person. And so that's why I really love that story, is because Otto, at the end of it, he realizes I'm not the superior Spider-Man. Peter Parker is the rightful Spider-Man. I don't have what it takes completely, even though he has a very big ego throughout all the comics. But at this point, he really gets to a breaking point and realizes that he's not perfect, and that Spider-Man, Peter Parker, really had the better outlook. And that's what I really love about that story.
This is going to sound cheesy, but that is very profound. I mean,
it is, yeah.
Stop and think about, like you said, showing the villain what it means to be a hero. And for that change to happen. Mm-hmm. There's just something really, really cool about that. And we live in a world, and not to get overly political, but we live in a world where people have a hard time taking responsibility for their actions. I don't know why. I think it's built into human nature. But to have an image that we can hold up, a secular image, comic books, and we can learn through that, hey, you do need to take responsibility for your actions. Mm-hmm. That really speaks to me. And I'm going to assume it speaks to you as well.
Oh, yeah,
if it's
absolutely.
your favorite story, then of course.
Yes, one of my favorites. What about you, JC? What's one of your favorite Spider-Man or just any superhero story, I guess?
I really like the Extremis story with Iron Man.
That is a good one.
I find that very, very fascinating. And I'll be honest with you guys, again, for those of you who are not big into comic books, it's going to sound cheesy. One of the reasons I love Iron Man is because the idea of walking around in a metal suit is just fascinating. Partially because I can't really walk, but it's just really, really cool. And to take kind of a personal note here, and I think we all have stories like this. I was bullied in high school. I was bullied in junior high. So I can relate really strongly to Peter Parker and that on that side of things. As I got older, I kind of got a little snobby, and I was like, you know what? I need to stand up for myself. And eventually. And I think it's just something you do when you're in a field, and you know this, being a filmmaker, being an aspiring filmmaker, you gotta have thick skin. We talked about this last time.
Absolutely.
And I looked to Tony Stark for that, and I'm like, that dude has some thick skin.
Oh, he goes through so much.
And he's a bit of a jerk, but you'll notice in the MCU, and I think this happens in comics as well, he becomes a better guy over time. Mm-hmm. It's not like he's constantly this playboy, very flamboyant, kind of jerky figure. He really does become a better guy over time, and he realizes what's important. So I think Iron Man is really an underrated character. I do think he is a hero. He's a tragic hero, in my opinion. I mean, most of these heroes are. They all have a flaw. Mm-hmm. With Iron Man, I think the arrogance part came out more through Robert Downey Jr., and it's come out more in modern-day comics. The big thing in the original Iron Man comic books was that he had a heart injury.
Oh,
because that shrapnel blew up and hit him in the chest.
He was in agony, like, every issue when he was by himself.
Right.
It's crazy.
And I don't know if you've ever seen the art for this one or if you've ever actually read it.
Yes, I have read Extremis. I like it.
Okay, you've read that one. I was talking about the original Iron Man stories. They've got a story in there, and I forget her name. Well, anyway, the dude, as you can imagine, had so many girlfriends, probably didn't even keep all their names straight. But one of them got upset with Tony and shot him in the back. And he actually, I don't know if you've seen this, I'll have to look it up and show you.
Yeah, you might have to look it up.
But he actually sits in a technological wheelchair. And it's advanced, and like he can control the Iron Man thing through the chair.
Oh, really?
And Rhodey actually takes over.
Okay.
And goes to be Iron Man. Really interesting.
I knew that Rhodey took over as Iron Man for a time period there, but I don't think I've read the story you're talking about where he gets shot.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
It is. And the funny thing, ladies and gentlemen, and I think we talked about this in the last podcast too, stories change over time. And so now if you go to the MCU and you watch the first Iron Man, the war that he's demonstrating his weapon in, the Jericho
missile,
taking place during a Middle Eastern war. If you go back to the original comic books, it was taking place, I believe, in Vietnam.
Yep. I believe that's right.
So it's interesting to see that change. Anyway, to answer your question in a roundabout way, Extremis is my favorite story. Really, my two favorite Marvel heroes, Spider-Man has to be first, and then there's Iron Man.
Sure.
What I would love to see more of, and maybe we'll see it with the next Spider-Man movie that comes out, but that Iron Spider costume is pretty cool.
Yeah, that I think it looks phenomenal. Yeah. I love it. I'm glad that it doesn't look exactly the way it does in the comic books, because they were able to take a unique spin. They were really give it the Stark treatment, the way that his suits have been looking in the MCU. And I love the way it looks in the comic books, but I like the intricate details on the MCU Iron Spider. But we might see it more in a Homecoming, or I guess Far From Home is what it's called, right? Yes. I think from some of the set photos, what I've seen is that they're kind of going with more of a Steve Ditko color scheme also on his suit. So instead of like the bright blue, it's going to be a lot darker, like almost black, but like it's more of like a navy kind of, I guess. Because like you probably remember from the older comics when Ditko was still the artist, he would like ink in Spider-Man's blue accents with just like pure ink. So I think that they're kind of going for that a little bit, but yeah, I'm so excited for this movie. I think it's fantastic.
Yes, and
great follow-up.
And I have to agree. And Ethan and I were talking about going to see Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh yes.
You guys have to really look at that. Miles Morales is not my favorite Spider-Man by any means, but his story is interesting. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very interesting story. I guess for me, I'm just sappy when it comes to death, and so when I have to watch Peter Parker die in a panel of a comic book, I'm like, no.
Have you read that in Ultimate Spider-Man I guess it was Ultimate Comics Spider-Man when he dies? You've probably read that? Yeah. I don't have a physical copy of it, but I read it, and I also saw like a moving comic of it. So like someone made a video on YouTube, and it's really well done, where they have somebody voice each character in the panels, and they kind of move the camera around on the page, and it's really good. And that the death of Spider-Man, it hit me, like the way that they were acting and portraying that, even though it was just images on a screen and voices, it was really well done.
You know what's really sad? I went in to get a copy of that death issue into vintage stock. What's really, really sad about it, they've got the comic in a plastic bag, and it's sealed, and it says "The Death of Spider-Man," and the bag itself is black. Like
really?
Going to a funeral.
Whoa, I didn't know that. Man, that's heavy.
And you know what I could never understand is that the Goblin killed him by throwing a car on top of him.
Oh, yeah. So I guess the context of that also is that Peter was also shot by the Punisher.
Well, okay.
So like I think it was in the issue like right before it. Basically the Avengers are fighting somebody in Manhattan, and the Punisher is trying to kill Captain America. And so Peter sees this and pushes Captain America out of the way, like they were like on the Queensboro Bridge or something. And so the bullet hits Peter's leg, and so he's bleeding like profusely throughout the rest of the until he dies. And then so then he's fighting Norman Osborn in Queens or something, and then Peter lifts up that giant semi-truck, which I thought was really cool, smashes it down on him, but then he dies. And
you know, the Ultimate Green Goblin is pretty cool.
Yeah, he's kind of like a Hulk Green Goblin, kind of, but it was a unique spin. Yeah. It was good.
Very, very interesting. And guys, I know we've been joking around and laughing here. I really do want to impart, though, my condolences to the relatives of Stan Lee, And just to all of us, I know for those of us like Ethan and myself who really love these characters, and like we've said, it goes beyond entertainment for us. I don't mean that in a, I believe in Santa Claus type way, but I really do believe in what these creations stand for. And I think we need those examples now more than ever in our culture. And so it goes beyond entertainment for me, and it sounds like it does for Ethan too. I just have to say, make sure that you really do try to take those lessons to heart and be a hero to somebody. It really does make a difference. I keep going back to that cameo. One person really can make a difference.
Great cameo.
I can't overstate it. I don't think I can wear it out. It really is cool. And Stan Lee just has a charm about him.
He does. He does. He's
interesting.
I've actually seen Stan Lee in real life. Not like
really.
I haven't never like stood like near him, but I was at Kansas City Planet Con. I think it was 2016, I think, summer 2016, and Stan Lee was like the big guest there. They were actually going to have Stan Lee at Planet Con, which is kind of like, it's like a smaller Comic Con in Kansas City. They have it every year. It's really fun. But I went there with some friends, and they had purchased like the Stan Lee package. So they got to go see Stan Lee. They got to get a photo taken with him, and they had him sign, he could sign anything, like a book or a poster or whatever. And so then, but I went to the panel that he was in, and that was like, it was packed in there. Everybody wanted to go see Stan Lee. It was really cool to get to like see him, because he's even on stage in front of all those people. He's still just Stan Lee. He's a humble guy. He loves talking about superheroes and reminiscing and all that. He loves talking to his fans, and like, because like they have the questions and everything. People can come up to the microphones, and he's willing to just talk about basically anything. It was kind of hard for him a little bit to like remember like specific things. Like he like before they had the questions, he was like, I love talking about superheroes, but please don't ask about anything specific. Like in 1966, do you remember writing this particular line? I'm probably not going to remember it. So he had a preface with that, but it was so cool to see him up there. And I have a couple photos of him. I'll have to show you. I think they're on my Instagram, but I'll have to show you them. It was really awesome though.
When I made the announcement, and I think I sent it to you, when I made the announcement about doing a podcast on this and just talking about Stan Lee's death, one of the things that I said, and I'll reiterate it here, there are people out there in the comic book world who believe that Stan Lee cheated his coworkers out of credit, and there's a part where I can understand that, but at the same time you have to understand that that's the nature of the business, and the man is also dead, so it's not fair to attack somebody when they're not here to defend themselves. So he really did leave an impact on this industry, whether he created all these characters or not. I just know that man loved what he did. And it's like Ethan said, he was a humble guy. I don't think he really expected, and I think he would say, and probably has said, that he didn't expect a lot of these heroes to get off the ground like they did.
Oh, yeah. He originally, his big thing growing up was he wanted to write the great American novel. Like, working in comic books like was kind of like his part-time job at first, and then he got into it, he started publishing and everything, but he wanted to write the novel. And so that's why he came up with the name Stan Lee, is because for a writer, it was kind of embarrassing at the time to be writing for a comic book. Like, so he didn't want someone to track him down, like when he wrote his novel, like, oh, he wrote comic books, let's disregard the rest of his work. So that's why he came up with Stan Lee. But you can see that it kind of shifted, because now Stan Lee is his legal name. Like, he really got sucked into the business, and he loved it. He loved everything about it.
And the sad thing, and I don't know if you've ever kept up with POW Entertainment, but that's the company that he worked for, or he actually created.
Yes.
And he was in that until he died. But the real sad thing about that is it never took off in the way that his Marvel creations did.
Yeah.
I think once you do Marvel, it's like, well, what else can I do? It's like I said, though, he left such a thumbprint on that industry. And you've got people all over the place. You even look at just the Batman animated series. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
That's a defining moment in Batman history. And people will remember that for a long time.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they actually just released like a a whole enhanced version of that series.
Yeah, the entire series you can buy it. My friend Kimmy bought it, actually.
Kimmy is a huge Batman fan.
Yes, he is. You know Kimmy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh man, he loves Batman. But I say that to say this: when somebody leaves their mark on an industry, you're gonna know it. And if Stan Lee was just this big cheat and had no idea what he was doing, we wouldn't be talking about him today.
Yeah.
Yes, there were other people that were involved. You mentioned Steve Ditka and so many others involved in the process. And the whole debate over, well, who really creates the character? Is it the person that has the idea or puts it in ink? I think it's a team effort. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't take away from what Stan did. I think everybody who's in comics now owes some of their career to that man. And
absolutely.
You look at the actors and the actresses of the MCU. They've thanked Stan Lee. You've got Captain America. Actually, Steve Rogers, who is actually Chris Evans.
yep. Who was also the Human Torch.
Right.
For those of you from the 2000s.
I actually thought that was a really good movie series. Did you?
They were solid. They were good. They were good movies. They would get a little campy, but they had a good plot.
Yeah.
And they had interesting people.
I never watched the new one. But
No, I haven't seen that one either. I've seen one scene from it on YouTube, I think, and it was whatever.
But guys, I don't know if I can just put into words how much comic books mean to me. And it's like Ethan said, it really is a tough question. We're not sitting here trying to be dramatic. It's like asking me if I had children, which child is my favorite. I'm going to assume. I've never been through that, but this is kind of like that. They have left such an impact on my life, and it sounds like it's the same with you.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even really express how I feel.
I saw this great interview, I think it was just a couple days ago I saw it with Kevin Feige, and he was talking about how much of an impact Stan Lee has had just on his career. And for those of you out there that aren't like totally into film or know everything or know like the ins and outs and the people in there, but Kevin Feige he was a writer on most of the Marvel movies, and he's been like executive producer on all these MCU films, and he gave all that credit to Stan Lee for like it was because of this man that I had a career. He always got me in. He got me in on to start writing for these movies, and he knows how much I love comic books, and it's because of him that I've been able to build my whole career building this MCU
right.
and having such a successful business here with Marvel Film Studios and all of that. So really, not only has Stan Lee left a big legacy on his own, but he's helped other people to start and launch their own legacies,
right.
which I find really fascinating.
Right. And you look at, names out there now, Image Comics. Image Comics is a conglomeration of DC artists and writers, Marvel artists and writers who wanted to do their own thing. And I really believe Stan would give his blessing to new creators today. He knows that the industry, like I said, the message of superheroes is bigger than him, and the example you just gave illustrates that perfectly. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say? I think I've said so much, I don't know what else to say.
Just to kind of go back to the whole thing with Stan Lee and like cheating out like Ditko and Jack Kirby and all that. Right. There's a way to kind of an easy way to understand like maybe where some of the discord came from, and maybe you're familiar with the Marvel method of comic book production. So basically, a writer like Stan Lee would kind of come up with an outline of what they wanted the book to be, and then just kind of hand that off to the artist, and the artist would draw up the panels and do the art, and then they would give that back to Stan Lee or the writer, and then he would fill in all the captions and the dialogue. And so part of that, not only that would kind of cause a little bit of discord because Stan Lee was kind of the first person to implement a credits page for the artists also who did some of the writing too. So that kind of appeased them for a little while, and understandably so. But Stan Lee himself, he has such a big personality, and his big thing was that he was a really good salesman, or like a he had a lot of showmanship for his characters. So he was really able to sell these characters and really get the higher ups in Marvel at the time to really buy into it and see like, okay, we do need to make a Spider-Man book. This is going to be popular. This is going to be big. After that Amazing Fantasy sold out and people saw Stan Lee had an idea that worked, and Fantastic Four, all that, he was really able to sell these characters, and some of it, people, there's always a conflict when it comes to creative endeavors that involve multiple people. Like filmmaking is the same way. But yeah, Stan Lee, I mean, he cared about these people that he worked with quite a bit, and he was a very busy man, and maybe that was sometimes hard to see. But yeah, he loved what he did, and he loved the people he worked with.
Just a story to wrap up. I ended up calling POW Entertainment. This is about when I was like 11, 12 years old.
Really?
Yeah. And I really, really wanted to meet the guy. And I was actually trying to I don't know if you're familiar with Shriners Hospital, but...
I don't think so.
I was a patient over there for a time. And what they do is they'll do operations for people who have orthopedic issues or burns victims, if you're familiar with burns hospitals at all, just any of those types of things. I was trying to see, because I've always been the type of person to reach out to an organization, even when I was young. I mean, I love talking, if you can't tell by now. I love to talk. And so I reached out to POW Entertainment and I called. And of course, being a kid, I didn't think, well, Stan's busy, he wouldn't talk to me. But you're told that so often, it's like, well, okay. But I called and I actually got in touch with a coworker of his. And I said, I'd like to talk to Stan Lee. Of course, they're like, okay, well, who do you think you are? And so I said, well, I understand he's busy, but I have to tell him how much his work means to me. I have to tell him just how much it's changed and really, in a way, and again, not to make him out to be God, it saved my life to an extent. And it gave me this sense of being able to overcome anything. Yeah. And anyway, I'm very persistent. I'm not going to tell you how many times I called. But I called a lot. And if they could have, they probably would have called my parents and said, make sure your son doesn't get the phone.
Stop letting him get on the phone.
But I called a lot. And eventually, I got through to his office, Stan's office.
That's amazing.
And I hear, hello? And I'm like, oh, it's Stanley, oh my gosh.
That is fantastic.
And I'm an 8-year-old kid to 11-year-old kid, whatever. And I freaked out. I'm like, Stan. And
I love that.
He goes, who is this? Stan. And I freaked out. I mean, I fangirled all over the place, fanboyed all over the place.
Man.
And didn't actually have a conversation. He hung up.
But you got to hear his voice. And he was like, who is this? Oh, that is fantastic. Yeah. I love that.
Guys, I just tell you, I really believe that man cared about his fans. Mm-hmm. I had to come to realize that, when you get to that level, you're so busy. It's almost impossible to have family time, be creative, and deal with fans. And so it makes sense, but hey, we'll have to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this.
Even after Into the Spider-Verse comes out, maybe we could come back and do a review on that. After I beat the Marvel Spider-Man game, maybe we could do a review on that.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to talk about both of those.
That's a great game. Good. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't played that yet, make sure you get out there and play it. It's a great game. Ethan, thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, thinking of me.
True believers, remember, you can do anything. You can be a hero. You can be the change in the world that you want to see. And Excelsior.
Excelsior.
Would say thank you so much for joining us. God bless you, and God bless Stan Lee.